This past Saturday, the New Mexico Lobos defeated the New Mexico State Aggies 50-40 in the 114th installment of the Rio Grande Rivalry. The New Mexico colleges ended their day by posting a combined 43-point fourth quarter. But what happened? How did the Lobos manage to outlast the Aggies? The commentary of the Rio Grande Rivalry starts right now. Welcome back to the Play by Play podcast. This is another bonus episode where today we will be covering the recent installment of the Rio Grande rivalry that took place this past Saturday between the New Mexico Lobos and the New Mexico State Aggies. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe, leave a like down below, comment, and share with your friends. And if you have not already, please feel free to follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, where not only will you get to see my instant reaction to all breaking news in the sports world, but you will also always be notified for whenever the podcast posts. All of the ads will be down below. There will be a bar popping up right here. And without further ado, guys, let's get into this. So Saturday between the Aggies and the Lobos, it was a pretty back and forth type of contest. Definitely not something that we've seen in years past. I was at the game not only on Saturday, but I went to the game that was last year in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the game last year was so much different. The first quarter was much more of a back and forth, two teams scoring. But then once that second half, the Aggies definitely opened up the scoreboard much more. And it just seemed like the Lobos didn't really have any real answer. But this year was much different. You start off the game with the Aggies going 3-and-out straight up. The UNM defense absolutely clobbered them and made them kick the ball to them. Then you had UNM coming out and putting together a solid drive that ended in a touchdown. And then once the ball returned back to the Aggies, you had them going for a huge 84-yard run by Lorenzo McMillan for a touchdown to even things up. And from there, it was really just a back and forth contest of two teams trying to match each other. And of course, with UNM winning the game, they ended up getting the better of it, winning by 10 points. But why? Why? I mean, this was a New Mexico State team last year that posted one of the best offenses in the country. It was a team that was obviously led by star quarterback Diego Pavia and Coach Kell. And now, they're 1-4. They lose to UNM, who prior to this were 0-4 themselves and didn't look like they could really compete with the Lobos. They didn't really look like they were on the same level, especially in that second half where UNM was able to open up a little bit more for themselves. And the interesting thing is when you look at the box score, things are very, very similar between the two. You had starting quarterback for UNM and Devin Dampier going 13 for 28. Santino Marucci from New Mexico State, he went 13 for 29. So same there. You had Dampier throwing for 250 yards. You had Marucci going for 190, but with a touchdown. So very similar statistics there. UNM, slight advantage in the running game, having 50-plus yards over the Aggies. But really, I mean, up to down, they're when it comes to the yardage, when it comes to the efficiency throwing down the field, wasn't a lot between these two teams. Sure, UNM was able to outgain them by nearly 100 yards, but up and down the roster, there wasn't much. So what separated these two teams? What problems went wrong for the New Mexico State Aggies? And what problems also went on for the Lobos? Because moving forward, they're going to have to continue to win games, obviously. And the first thing that I think was the big thing for the Aggies was the fact that the passing game down the field was not great whatsoever. We talked about Marucci, 13 for 29, missed 16 passes. And being in there in person, I could tell you that there were 5, 6, potentially even 7 throws within that 10, 15, potentially even 20-yard margin where he just completely missed. He overthrew his receiver, was trying to lead him too much, and it went over his head. And there were some pretty bad misses that if he completed them, would have completely changed the dynamic of the game and opened up the field. We've talked about this in so many episodes. We're going to continue talking about this as we talk about football. Is you need both aspects of your offensive game to be efficient. You need your passing game and your running game to be efficient, because when you do that, your offense becomes much more unpredictable. Teams don't know what to scheme against, what to go up against. But most importantly, and we talked about this a couple episodes ago when talking about the Denver Broncos, is you need to be able to throw the ball down the field. More importantly, your yards per play likely have to be more than 6 or 7 yards, because that means you're having the ability to extend your plays, which is super important because when you're below that type of threshold, it really constricts you. It puts you in almost a red zone setting over the length of the field, and it's really, really difficult to move the ball because the defense starts to close in. And while the Aggies were able to get over that at 6.5 yards per pass, because those downfield throws weren't hitting consistently, you felt at the end of the game UNM beginning to push up, and because of that, there was much more pressure on the running backs getting into the backfield, and there was much more pressure on the quarterback getting him out of the pocket and making him much more uncomfortable. And I think that's why when you look at these numbers, you take a look, the Aggies were 5 for 13 on third down. And it's because UNM was able to put so much pressure on them in that backfield. It was very, very difficult for the Aggies to end up converting. And when you look at the other side, UNF had 9 yards, so it was clear that they were hitting those deep passes. They were hitting those deep passes all night. Wide receiver junior wide receiver out of Texas, Caleb Medford, he had one heck of a game. He only had 2 receptions over the whole game, but he combined for nearly 100 yards, and those were both on deep passes where he completely blew out the opposing corner. And that was another weakness that we saw from the New Mexico State Aggies, was the ability to defend down the field. The cornerbacks let up a lot, and again, that opened up Mexico's running game even more, because then State was looking more for that passing game down the field. UNM was able to advance the ball much, much more. Now, on the flip side for the Aggies, some of the things that I thought were positive about the game, number one, being their pass rush. Devin Dampier was on the run all night. He was having to roll out of the pocket. And because he is a very talented quarterback, just as a sophomore, by the way, I'm really, really impressed with Devin Dampier and his recent performances. He was able to complete throws, but they definitely did not make it very easy for them, and they also did a pretty solid job at limiting the duo of Dampier and Luke Wysong. That has been his go-to receiver throughout the season, throughout these past 5 games. Wysong did have 5 receptions, but we're only going for about 45 yards, so they were able to limit Wysong and close him in. You could tell that that was a scouting for them, and they did a really, really effective job. Now, yes, the defensive line potentially on a lot of runs not get a great push on it. Of course, I mean, you had Javen Jacobs for New Mexico running for a long of 50 yards. You had Devin Dampier running for a 24 long run. You had Nakiri Rogers at 29. And the entire New Mexico rushing team ended up ending for 331. So you still need more push on that offensive line, and you still would like to convert more on your pressure and getting the running back into the backfield and sacking the quarterback in the backfield. But the point is that they are beginning to advance and continue their pressure. And now all they need to do is finish. They had no sacks for the game. They need to begin to convert on those, because once they can start doing that, not only does that obviously stop the play and make the offense lose yards, but that also creates a huge amount of energy and momentum that just carries the team across quarters. And that was something that I personally saw, especially in that second quarter. State just looked like, energy wise, they were dragging. It felt like New Mexico had a lot of momentum coming into that quarter. They were very hyped. You could see it on the sideline. Everyone was jumping, running around, talking to each other. And there was really nothing behind State to really create a response to that, which is why they went into the half down 11 points. Now, eventually in the fourth quarter, they were able to bring that energy up, and that's why you saw them come back and score for 23. But also at the same time, it was the fourth quarter. UNM had a pretty sizable lead. State had to take a lot more risks passing it downfield, which they were successful on, and having long runs. That's why you kind of saw the game kind of open up a little bit. I think both teams kind of just threw their hands in the air and said, whatever, we're gonna try to score as much and outscore the opponent. But State needs to be able to do that the entire game. They need to be able to keep that confidence and that energy throughout the entire game. They also need to continue to feed more into their running backs. I do not understand why Lorenzo McMillan only had 1 carry on the day when he had an 84 long rushing yard touchdown. That made absolutely no sense to me, but State continued to go back to Seth McGowan and Mike Washington, who, don't get me wrong, is very, very effective. I like Seth McGowan. I think that he is a great power back that is able to carry 2, 3 guys that are on his back and get extra yards. He is a huge, huge fighter. But when you have a spark like that for 84 yards, especially on the outside run, you need to at least look towards that guy's number a couple of times. I mean, to have one carry after you take it nearly the entire length of the field, that is very inexcusable for me. And it was pretty much the entire bright spot for State for the whole game was the rushing game. Continuing to go to that. If you have a really solid rushing game, UNM should not be out carrying you by 14 carries. Continue to feed onto your running backs. When you're averaging 8.1 yards per game, when you have 4 rushing touchdowns on the game, continue to feed your running backs. Continue. Feed Seth McGowan, feed Mike Washington, but also maybe give Lorenzo McMillan a little bit of his share as well, especially if he's going up for an electric 84-yard run. So I mean, that was for me really the big highlights of the game is UNM really dominated this game in the passing, in the air game. They were able to throw the ball deep pretty much at will, despite the completion, the attempts being very, very similar, the yardage being very, very similar, and Satino Marucci actually recording a passing touchdown. UNM still continued to dominate that passing game, and they stuck with that strategy, which is what helped them so much. And State, despite them having less rushing yards in the day, they did a lot better on the ground game. So New Mexico was great through the air. State was great on the ground. And I think that both of these teams to continue to be successful, they're going to need to feed that prospect of their offensive game much more. Devin Dampier, 28 attempts, that's not enough. He should be throwing for 30, 35 attempts per game. And like I just said, when New Mexico State rushing, 35 attempts per game, when you're averaging 8.1, you should be getting into the 40s, the 45s, the 50s, up into that upper echelon because that is the part of your offense that is most efficient. Rely and lean on that part of the offense. Don't rely on it too much to where it becomes to the point where you're too predictable and teams kind of realize, okay, they're likely going to run it almost every single play. But continue to lean towards that point much, much more. For UNM on the other side, continue to lean towards your passing game a lot more. And defensively, continue to keep your quarterback strapped up on the receivers and begin to get a lot more pressure into that backfield. It's one thing that State performed really well. It's one thing that UNM didn't do enough. Despite them having 1.5 sacks today, despite them having some solid tackles, they had a really difficult time pinning down New Mexico State running backs into that backfield. So for UNM, continue that passing game, improve your pass rush. And for State, keep your pass rush, improve them to the point where they can begin to convert on these sacks and tackle for losses in the backfield, improve that secondary, make sure that they can be able to play press man off the line of scrimmage. Do not feed into zone. Do not lay your cornerbacks off because that is where they got really be on deep post routes and deep crossing routes. And then offensively, you're going to need to start converting on some of your deep passing routes, and you need to continue to feed into your running game. And that is how you're going to be successful. But that's all for me today, guys. A pretty quick episode today covering a home state rivalry for myself. It was so much fun being there at the game and watching these two teams go head to head. And I can't wait to see what happens next year once these two teams have another year to improve. And both of these head coaches have another year of experience behind them. But let me know what you guys thought about it. If you're from New Mexico State, if you're from UNM, did you guys have fun in the game? What did you guys think of the game? Let me know down below in the comments. And of course, like I always say, if you're watching this on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe, leave a like, and share with your friends as well as commenting down below. And if you haven't already, please feel free to follow us on all social medias, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. All the ads will be down below, and there will be a bar popping up right here. Without further ado, guys, that is it from me today, and I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.